Hi again, Chris from Boost Tech. I just want to show you a bit more on our transmission control modules. So, something I do want to touch on is the time or the allocated time that is given to a shift. This can be denoted by what we call a steady state, a preamble, and a postamble. So steady state is when essentially nothing is shifting, nothing's happening, it is in gear, could be neutral, park, reverse, drive, third, fourth, 10th, whatever it is. So that's steady state. So when we're having a look at line pressure, we have a steady state pressure control and we have a preamble and a postamble, which we have enabled on this vehicle. So preamble is the time allocated to before the shift occurring or where the solenoids change state. So we can actually allocate a time before a shift occurs, assuming we don't have any other issues with RPM and so forth, which you can control. So shift time parameters, so preamble. So we do have a little bit of preamble going into reverse on this vehicle. So about a third of a second. And what that means is if you allocate time to the preamble, you can actually do something during that part of the time before the shift occurs. And that might be line pressure control, for instance, or something to do with the torque management. So it can be really quite handy to smooth out some things before the fact of the shift occurs. So that's in the preamble. So you can allocate time, but normally there is bugger all time actually in preamble in most shifts. Like you do sort of want to have them in. You do want to change the loading of the valve body in this particular car with how much line pressure is given to it before a shift, and it's usually a higher amount of line pressure. So you can sort of pre-lube everything, get it ready for the shift. So everything happens during the allocated time, and that allocated time is the post-amble. So we have a varying amount of time here, and some of this is closed loop as well. So you just got to remember that, like, this allocated time does not necessarily mean how long the shift is going to occur, but it does give you a time window to play with different factors such as line pressures and also your torque management. So if we're allocating, say, on low load on this vehicle of say nearly a second on 3 to 4, we have the opportunity to change what happens during that shift. So torque limits during that shift is absolute. And by that, we have here a torque limit of 500 newton meters in low load. So basically, there is going to be like no instruction from the TCM to the ECU to limit the engine performance during the shift. And then we can modify at what percentage we have this limiting the torque management, or how much it's limiting the engine torque based on where the shift is, or where in the percentage of the shift the limiting is occurring. And then after the shift is finished, what kind of limitations do we have? Now you can see here that they're a lot lower in this vehicle on the low loads, and this is mainly just to not have the momentum of the engine push through the vehicle and accelerate it without what would you say, without actually giving any input on the throttle. So we do want to sort of limit the maximum that it will do, and it is a dynamic number, this torque. So like you can actually accelerate through a shift and produce more torque, but you can limit what happens by changing the torque limits during the final shift of the stage, or during the torque limits while the final part of the shift is occurring. And then once we're finished with all the time, we go to steady state, and we obviously have a steady state torque limit in this vehicle. So during the 3 to 4 shift, we've got a limit that's quite open, and we're not necessarily ever going to achieve that, but it is something that you can instruct. And I can just demonstrate here in neutral. We've got a limit of 350 newton meters. Now that allows me to rev up, and you should be able to hear that. Now if I change that to 50 newton meters in steady state, I'm pushing my foot down, and that is all that's happening. So it's quite effective in reducing what happens. So down at 20 newton meters, like basically the engine's not allowed to accelerate or increase it in RPM. Going back to 350, some of these numbers are just like what this vehicle wants, and that's where the tuning comes in. But at least now you've got a bit of an understanding what you can play with in terms of timing. So before shift is preamble, during the shift is postamble, and then steady state is what it is while nothing is changing. So usually in gear is what we call steady state. Now you can disable these functions for line pressure effects at least, and that can be quite useful on very simple gearboxes, but where you're trying to get ultimate smoothness, it's definitely handy. So I'd highly recommend good use of your preamble and postamble times. What else can we look at? So we'll probably let that be for now.